The metallic halls of the Galactic Academy of Military Sciences buzzed with excitement as students hurried to their afternoon classes. Among the crowd of diverse alien species, Tom stood out not just as the only human, but as the shortest person in the corridor. His sturdy frame and determined walk drew curious glances from passing students. It was only his third day of the academy, and already he could feel the weight of everyone's stares. The other students, with their tall frames and advanced tech gear, made no effort to hide their curiosity about the Deathworlder in their midst. As Tom entered the Advanced Weapons Systems classroom, the usual chatter died down. He took his usual spot at the back, trying to avoid attention. The classroom itself was a marvel of technology, with holographic displays showing various weapon schematics floating in the air. Well, if it isn't the monkey from Earth, Blue's voice cut through the silence. The tall, blue-skinned alien stood up from his seat, his 4 eyes fixed on Tom. 2 of his classmates, Green and Red, as Tom had nicknamed them based on their skin colors, snickered behind him. "I heard your people still use something called gunpowder for weapons. How primitive." Tom kept his face neutral, remembering the Academy's strict rules about Deathworld weapons. There was a reason human weapons were banned from regular classes, but these aliens wouldn't understand. They were too proud of their energy weapons and plasma rifles. "Actually," Tom said quietly, "we have many types of weapons." He tried to focus on unpacking his datapad, but Blue wasn't done. "Show us then," Blue challenged, his upper eyes narrowing while his lower ones gleamed with mockery. Surely the mighty Deathworlder isn't afraid to demonstrate his species' weapons. The classroom had gone completely silent. Even the holographic displays seemed to dim, as if sensing the tension. "It's against Academy regulations," Tom replied, his voice firm. "Deathworld weapons are restricted for a reason." Green stepped forward, his thin fingers tapping on Tom's desk. "The regulations are just bureaucratic nonsense. They probably just don't want us to laugh at how backward human weapons are." "Yeah," Red joined in, his scaled skin shifting colors with excitement. "Our personal shields can stop any energy weapon in the galaxy. What could your primitive bullets do?" Tom sighed, remembering his briefing before joining the academy. "Look, there's a whole history behind these regulations. It's not about being primitive or advanced." "Prove it then," Blue interrupted. "After final class, the testing range will be empty. Bring your weapons, and we'll bring our best shields." His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of challenge in his species. "Unless you're scared your toys will embarrass you in front of the whole class." More students had gathered around now, their curiosity piqued. Tom could see at least 8 different species represented, all watching with interest. Some had their data recorders ready, expecting either a good show or a good laugh. "I don't think," Tom started, but Blue cut him off again. "We'll make it worth your while. If your weapons can even scratch our shields, we'll admit humans aren't as primitive as we thought. If they can't," he paused for effect, "you'll have to submit a formal paper on why Earth technology is inferior to galactic standards." The crowd murmured with approval. Tom felt his patience wearing thin. He had tried to be diplomatic, tried to respect the rules, but their arrogance was becoming unbearable. "Fine," he said finally, surprising even himself. "After final class. But remember, you asked for this." As the professor entered and the students scattered to their seats, Tom couldn't help but wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. He knew why human weapons were restricted. He knew the damage they could do. But maybe, he thought, these aliens needed a practical lesson in why some rules existed for very good reasons. Blue and his friends spent the rest of the class shooting smug looks at Tom, clearly pleased with themselves. They had no idea what they had just gotten themselves into. As Tom half listened to the lecture about advanced energy weapon harmonics, his mind wandered to the locked case in his room, the one containing his grandfather's old service pistol, brought along as a reminder of home. Sometimes, he reflected, the best lessons were learned the hard way. Professor Enks noticed something was wrong the moment he entered the faculty lounge. The usual calm atmosphere was disturbed by excited whispers and quick glances between students passing by the door. After 40 years of teaching at the academy, he had developed a sixth sense for trouble. The old professor's skin, a mottled gray that showed his age, rippled with concern as he made his way to his office. His species could sense electrical disturbances in the air, and right now, the energy patterns felt wrong. Too excited, too focused. He was about to unlock his office when he heard it, snippets of conversation from around the corner. The human agreed to bring his weapons. Blue convinced him. After final class, Professor X froze. In his 4 decades at the academy, he had seen 3 incidents involving human weapons. Each one had ended badly, very badly. He found Blue and his friends in the corridor, surrounded by other students. Their excited chatter died as soon as they saw him. The professor's 4-fingered hand gripped his walking staff tighter. "Blue," he said firmly, "a word in my office." Now, the young alien followed him, trying to hide his nervousness. Once inside, Professor X settled into his hover chair and fixed all 3 of his eyes on the student. "I hear you've convinced our human student to demonstrate his weapons," the professor said quietly, despite the very clear regulations against such demonstrations. Blue straightened up, confidence returning. "Professor, we just want to prove that our defensive technology is superior. The human's primitive weapons can't possibly." Silence. Professor X's voice cracked like thunder. It was the first time in years he had raised his voice. "You fool. You arrogant, ignorant fool." The professor floated to a cabinet behind his desk. His trembling hands pulled out an old, scared piece of metal. He placed it on the desk between them. "Do you know what this is?" Blue leaned forward, curious despite himself. "It looks like armor plating." "This," Professor X said, "was part of my personal shield generator, top military grade. The best defensive technology available 30 years ago." He turned the piece over. There was a perfect, round hole straight through it. A human weapon did this. 1 shot. Blue's confidence wavered slightly. "But our shields are much more advanced now. We have." "You have nothing." Professor X cut him off. "Do you know why human weapons are restricted? Why they're classified as Deathworld technology? Because they don't follow our rules. They don't care about your fancy shields. They don't care about energy dispersal or plasma containment." The professor leaned forward. "In the Battle of 7 Systems, I watched an entire squad of our best troops, with our best shields, fall to a single human with what they called a hunting rifle, not a military weapon. A civilian tool for hunting animals." Blue's 4 eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of distress in his species. But that's impossible. Our shields were designed to stop energy weapons," Professor X finished. "Like every other species in the galaxy, we developed energy weapons because they were clean, efficient, and easy to control. Humans," he shuddered. "Humans took a different path. They mastered the art of throwing very small pieces of metal very, very fast." The professor's voice grew quiet. "Cancel your demonstration, Blue. Cancel it now. Because if you don't, you'll learn why some rules exist the hard way. And trust me, you don't want to learn this lesson the way I did." Blue stood up slowly, his earlier bravado completely gone. But as he reached the door, pride flickered in his eyes again. I still think our new shields can handle it. They're much stronger now." Professor X watched him leave, a deep sense of dread settling in his stomach. He looked at the piece of armor again, at the clean hole punched through supposedly impenetrable defenses. Some lessons, he muttered to himself, must be learned the hard way. The Academy's testing range was eerily quiet after hours. Emergency lights cast long shadows across the reinforced walls, designed to contain the most powerful energy weapons in known space. Tom stood at one end of the range, a simple black case resting on the table before him. Blue and his friends had brought an audience. Nearly 20 students from different species crowded the observation area. Their various eyes, sensory organs, and recording devices all focused on the human. Some sat on hovering chairs, others stood or floated, but all watched with obvious curiosity. "Your last chance to back out, human," Blue called out. He was wearing his family's pride and joy, the latest model of personal shield generator. The device hummed softly on his chest, projecting a barely visible field of protective energy around him. Green and Red were similar, if slightly less advanced, models. Tom looked at the eager faces in the crowd. None of them understood. None of them had grown up on Earth, where humanity's weapons had evolved alongside their users for thousands of years. "I'll start with something basic," Tom said quietly, opening his case. "This is what we call a 9mm pistol. It's considered a very simple weapon on Earth." The alien students murmured in amusement. The weapon looked absurdly primitive to them. Just metal and plastic, no energy cells or plasma coils in sight. "That's your weapon?" Green laughed, his scales shifting color with amusement. "It doesn't even have a power source." "It doesn't need one," Tom replied, checking the safety. "This uses a chemical reaction to launch a small piece of metal. We call it a bullet." Red stepped forward, adjusting his shield settings. "Let me test it first. My shield is rated for light combat. If it can handle plasma bolts, your little metal thrower won't even register." Tom loaded a single round into the magazine. The familiar click-clack of the slide echoed in the range. Some of the alien students jumped at the mechanical sound, so different from their quiet energy weapons. "I'll aim for the center mass," Tom warned. "Ready?" Red stood confidently at the marked firing line, his shield humming. "Ready to be disappointed, human." Tom took careful aim. The range fell silent. Even Blue stopped smirking, sensing something in Tom's focused stance that gave him pause. The shot cracked through the air like thunder. Red flew backward, shield flickering wildly before failing completely. He landed hard on his back, gasping for air. A perfect circular hole marked the point where the bullet had passed through his shield like it wasn't even there. The observation area erupted in chaos. Students jumped up, shouting in various languages. Some rushed to help Red, who was thankfully just winded. The bullet had been caught by the thick padding of his academy uniform. "Impossible," Blue shouted over the noise. "Our shields can stop any weapon." "Any energy weapon," Tom corrected, placing the pistol down carefully. "Your shields are designed to disperse energy, to spread out the force of plasma and laser shots. But this," he held up a single brass bullet casing, "this is just a piece of metal moving very, very fast. Your shields don't know what to do with it." Green helped Red to his feet, both of them staring at Tom with new understanding. But Blue wasn't convinced. "A lucky shot," he declared, "and a weak shield. Try mine. Full power." Tom shook his head. "That's enough for today. You've seen what." "No." Blue's 4 eyes blazed with wounded pride. "You will test my shield. Unless you're afraid." The crowd had backed away, forming a wider circle. Some were frantically checking data readings from Red's failed shield. Others were recording everything with their devices. Nobody spoke. Tom looked at the determined alien, then at his pistol. He had tried to warn them, had tried to show them with just one shot. But some lessons had to be learned the hard way. "Fine," he said finally. "But remember, you asked for this." Blue stood at the firing line, his premium shield generator humming at full power. The energy field around him was now clearly visible, a shimmering blue bubble that distorted the air. Small arcs of electricity crackled across its surface, showing just how much power was being pumped into the defensive system. "This shield," Blue announced proudly to the watching crowd, "cost more than a small starship. It can stop a capital ship's point defense laser. Your primitive projectile doesn't stand a chance." Tom had switched magazines, loading what humans called standard ball ammunition. Nothing special, just regular rounds that any police officer might carry. He knew it would be more than enough. "Last warning," Tom said quietly. "Your shield is putting out so much energy it might make things worse. Several students in the observation area had taken cover behind protective barriers. They had seen what happened to Red's shield, and no one wanted to be near if Blue's more powerful shield failed in a spectacular way. "Just shoot," Blue demanded. All four of his eyes were fixed on Tom, two showing confidence, two betraying a hint of worry. Tom took aim. The range went silent again. Even the hum of Blue's shield seemed to fade away as everyone held their breath. The shot rang out. There was a sound like shattering glass mixed with a thunderclap. Blue's shield didn't just fail, it exploded. The energy field collapsed inward before bursting outward in a shower of sparks and electromagnetic pulses. The blast knocked Blue off his feet and sent him spinning through the air. Emergency lights started flashing. Somewhere, an alarm began to wail. The observation area's protective screens activated automatically, sensing the power surge. Green rushed to help his friend, who lay groaning on the floor. The expensive shield generator on his chest was now just a smoking piece of metal. "How?" Blue managed to ask as he sat up, his four eyes having trouble focusing. "The shield, it was at full power." "That's exactly the problem," Tom explained, safing his weapon. "Your shield works by catching energy weapons and dispersing their force across the energy field. But a bullet isn't energy. It's mass times velocity. When the bullet hit your shield, all that energy field did was make things worse." The other students gathered closer, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity and a hint of fear. Tom picked up a bullet casing from the floor. "Think of it like trying to catch a rock with a net made of lightning," he continued. "The rock doesn't care about the lightning. It just pushes through, and all that energy has to go somewhere. In this case, it fed back into your shield generator and overloaded it. Our whole defense system," one of the observing students said slowly. "It's all designed to stop energy weapons. Lasers, plasma, particle beams. Because that's what everyone else uses." Tom nodded. "Humans were the only ones crazy enough to keep developing ways to throw metal really fast. We call it kinetic energy weapons." Blue stood up shakily, helped by his friends. His pride had taken a bigger hit than his body. The shield generator that had been his family's prized possession was now worthless scrap. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why would you keep using such brutal weapons when energy weapons are cleaner, more advanced?" Tom started packing away his pistol. "Because they work. Because no matter how fancy your energy shield is, it can't stop good old-fashioned physics. That's why these weapons are restricted. Not because they're primitive, but because they're too effective against modern defenses." The alarm was still blaring, and they could hear security drones approaching the range. Blue looked at his ruined shield, then at the simple black case containing Tom's weapon. "I think," he said quietly, "I understand now why they call Earth a death world." The security alarm continued to echo through the testing range, but Blue wasn't done yet. His pride, already wounded, wouldn't let him accept defeat. From his pocket, he pulled out a small silver cube, a prototype shield generator that his family's company was still testing. "One more test," Blue said, his voice shaking slightly. "This isn't like the others. It's experimental technology." Tom's eyes widened as he recognized the warning symbols on the cube. "That's military-grade prototype equipment. It's not even approved for testing here." The other students backed away nervously. Even Green and Red looked uncertain as Blue attached the cube to his uniform. The device hummed to life, creating a shield that looked different from the others. Instead of blue energy, it produced a dark purple field that seemed to bend light around it. "Blue, don't be stupid," Green warned. "Those aren't cleared for student use." But Blue was beyond listening. The earlier humiliation had pushed him too far. "This shield uses quantum field technology. It doesn't just block energy. It shifts anything that hits it into another dimension. Nothing can get through." The security drones were getting closer, their warning sirens echoing in the corridors outside. They probably had minutes before the range was swarming with Academy security. "I'm not shooting at an untested shield," Tom said firmly, packing away his pistol. "That's not just against regulations. It's dangerous." "Afraid?" Blue taunted, but his voice cracked slightly. Two of his eyes showed fear, while the other two blazed with desperate determination. "Prove your primitive weapons can be our most advanced technology." Tom shook his head. "This isn't a competition. Those warning symbols mean the shield isn't stable. Using it cold. Then I'll prove it another way." Blue interrupted. He walked to the range's weapon wall and grabbed a plasma rifle. "A training weapon, but still dangerous. If you won't shoot, I'll show everyone how a real weapon works." The other students gasped. Using weapons without proper authorization was bad enough, but pointing them at another student, that was explicitly forbidden. "Blue, stop!" Red shouted. "You'll get expelled." The experimental shield crackled around Blue, its purple energy field starting to pulse irregularly. The cube was making a high-pitched whine that didn't sound healthy. Tom slowly raised his hands. "That shield is interacting badly with the plasma rifle's power core. Look at the energy readings." One of the observing students had a scanner out. "He's right. The quantum field is becoming unstable. The energy levels air." A sudden burst of purple light interrupted them as the experimental shield began to spark wildly. Blue tried to deactivate it, but the cube had fused to his uniform. The plasma rifle in his hand started to glow dangerously, its power core reacting to the unstable quantum field. "Everyone out," Tom shouted, diving behind a protective barrier. "The field is collapsing." The observation area emptied in seconds as students ran for safety. Blue stood frozen in panic as purple energy arced between the shield generator and the plasma rifle, creating a feedback loop that grew more intense by the second. The last thing Tom saw before the blast doors slammed shut was Blue's terrified face as the experimental shield imploded, taking a chunk of the training range with it. The boom shook the entire facility, and emergency containment fields sprang to life throughout the section. As smoke filled the range and emergency response alarms blared throughout the academy, Tom had only one thought. Professor X was going to be very, very disappointed in all of them. Through the chaos of emergency responders and security drones flooding in, he could already hear the professor's familiar footsteps approaching. This was going to be a long night of explanations. The academy's medical bay was crowded with students and staff. Emergency force fields had contained most of the blast, but the testing range's entire east wall would need replacing. Blue lay on a medical bed, his skin a pale shade of its normal color. The experimental shield had left strange purple burn marks across his chest, but the doctors said he would recover. Professor X stood in the center of the room, his three eyes moving from student to student. The old alien skin had turned almost white with anger and worry. Behind him, two Academy board members waited silently, their data tablets recording everything. "I'd warned you," the professor said quietly. His voice carried more disappointment than anger. "I specifically warned you about this very situation." Tom sat in a corner, his weapon case now sealed and tagged as evidence. The human looked tired but unhurt. Next to him, green and red couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "But sir," one of the observing students spoke up, "we didn't understand. We thought our shields." "Exactly," Professor X cut in. "You didn't understand. None of you understood. And that's exactly why these restrictions exist." He tapped his walking staff on the floor, bringing up a holographic display. "Look at this," he commanded. The display showed weapons development across different species. Every spacefaring race followed the same path, from physical weapons to energy-based ones. Every race except humans. The display zoomed in on Earth's timeline. While we were developing our first laser rifles, they were perfecting something called rifling, spinning the projectile for better accuracy. While we made plasma containment fields, they invented something called hollow point ammunition. Blue stirred on his bed, finally conscious enough to listen. The professor walked over to him. "Your experimental shield." X continued, was supposed to be the next great breakthrough in defense technology. It cost millions of credits to develop, and a simple metal projectile from a human handgun would have gone right through it, because it tried to shift the bullet into another dimension without accounting for its kinetic energy. The board members were taking notes rapidly. One of them spoke up. "Professor, perhaps you could explain why this makes human weapons so dangerous." X nodded. "Imagine you spent your whole life learning to defend against arrows, making better and better armor. Then someone shows up with a weapon that completely ignores armor. That's what human weapons are to our defenses." He turned back to the students. "We banned Deathworld weapons from regular classes because they expose a fundamental flaw in our entire approach to combat. Our shields, our armor, our whole defensive technology. It's all built around stopping energy weapons. But humans," he shook his head. "Humans never stopped improving on the simple idea of throwing things very, very hard." "But why?" Blue asked weakly from his bed. "Why didn't they switch to energy weapons like everyone else?" "Because they're from a death world," Enx explained. "On Earth, you don't get second chances. A weapon that might fail because of rain or dust or power loss isn't acceptable. Their projectile weapons are simple, reliable, and devastatingly effective." He looked at Tom. "That's why we restrict them. Not because they're primitive, but because they make our most advanced defenses look like paper." Today's demonstration proved that rather dramatically, I'd say. The room fell silent as everyone processed this. The scorch marks on the medical bay walls, the demolished testing range, and Blue's injuries all testified to the price of their ignorance. "The board will decide your punishments tomorrow," Professor X said finally. "Until then, think about what you learned today. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most dangerous to ignore." 1 month after the incident, the Academy's main lecture hall was packed with students. The damaged testing range was still under repair, its eastern wall now reinforced with additional containment fields. But today, something unprecedented was happening. Tom stood at the podium, facing hundreds of curious alien students. After the incident, the Academy Board had made a surprising decision. Instead of expulsion, the involved students received a different punishment. They had to attend a new mandatory course, Deathworld Combat Technologies 101. And Tom, much to his surprise, had been asked to teach it. "So," he began, looking at his audience, "who can tell me why humans still use projectile weapons?" Blue raised his hand from the front row. His burns had healed, leaving strange purple marks that would fade with time. The experience had changed him, humbled him in ways that showed in his all four eyes. "Because they're reliable," Blue answered. "They work in any environment, don't need power cells." And he paused, touching his chest where the experimental shield had failed. "And they ignore most of our defenses." "Correct," Tom nodded. "But there's more to it." Green, sitting next to Blue, straightened up. "They're simple. Simple things are harder to disrupt. Our energy weapons can be blocked by electromagnetic fields, power dampeners, or shield harmonics. But nothing stops physics." "Exactly," Tom agreed. He brought up a holographic display showing various human weapons through history. Humans learned early that the simplest solution is often the most reliable. A sharp piece of metal will cut whether you have power or not. A bullet will fire even if your enemy has the best energy shields in the galaxy. Red, who had become one of Tom's most attentive students, added, "And that's why the regulations exist. Not to protect us from primitive weapons, but to protect us from our own assumptions." The lecture hall murmured in agreement. Professor X, watching from the back, nodded approvingly. The old teacher had supported this unusual punishment from the start. "But here's the most important lesson," Tom continued. "It's not about which technology is better. It's about understanding different approaches." He loaded a training rifle with dummy rounds. "Every species develops technology based on their experiences. Humans come from a world where failure means death, so we value reliability over elegance." He pointed to the various alien students, Your species developed amazing energy weapons because your worlds allowed for more experimental approaches. Neither path is wrong. They're just different solutions to different problems. Blue stood up slowly. I learned it the hard way. I thought more advanced meant better. I thought our shields were unbeatable because they used complex technology. I was wrong. We were all wrong, Green added. We laughed at primitive weapons without understanding them. That's why this course is important. Tom smiled. And that's why the Academy now requires all students to study different technological approaches. Because in space, you never know what you might encounter. Understanding and respecting different technologies, even ones that seem primitive, might save your life one day. The lecture continued, but the message was clear. The incident had changed more than just the students involved. It had changed the Academy itself. New courses were added, focusing on various species' approaches to technology. The regulations about Deathworld weapons remained, but now everyone understood why they existed. As Tom finished his lecture, he noticed Professor X giving him a thumbs up, a very human gesture the old teacher had learned. Sometimes, Tom thought, the best lessons came from mistakes, and sometimes understanding why something was banned was more important than any punishment. Remember, he told his students as they left, technology isn't about being advanced or primitive. It's about solving problems. And sometimes, the simple solution is the most elegant one of all.